It is, without question, one of the stupidest films to come out of New Zealand for years.
I know.
Congratulations.
Yeah, it's about time.
On that achievement.
I know, because everything that we make over there is so like, it's so serious. We take ourselves so seriously in a lot of ways, even though we don't. Like a lot of the time, we don't take ourselves seriously. In our film, we often do. And I think it's because you come from like a small island nation. I always say that we're like the Iceland of the South Pacific. That we're trying to make sort of like, all our art's really dark, and it comes from this isolation, and it comes from this sort of deeply lonely, depressed place.
Now, this is a very funny film that could have gone off the rails by becoming one of those one joke movies that are sort of based on an idea that could sustain a 3-minute sketch but not a whole film. This could have been that. It's not. How did you develop the idea of a vampire share house so that it would sustain a feature film?
Well, we wanted to... that was basically all in the editing. Like, we had no idea what this thing would be when we were shooting it, because it felt stupid the entire time we were doing it. We had, the directors were dressed up in frilly shirts and 17th century costumes and stuff, and and we were trying to be. So there's right from the beginning we couldn't be taken seriously, and we couldn't really take any of it seriously. So I think one of the concerns might have been that we it was just going to be just complete buffoonery, and it's going to be like a really kind of, as you say, a one joke thing, and it's just going to be super broad and not really go anywhere. And then we ended up fighting a lot, not with each other, but like fighting the story, fighting again, pitting the story and the jokes against each other a lot during the editing. So we improvised like most of the film, and the big struggle throughout the edit was just trying to find that balance between story and comedy.
Did you really shoot 150 hours
About
of
130,
footage?
yeah.
That's a lot of footage, given that the film
cameras were just going on all day long, yeah.
Can I just to drill deep into that figure for a second? What were you shooting in hour 78? It's a remarkable amount of footage.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is. Well, a lot of the takes were like 20 minutes long.
Right.
So we would just go for it, and then and then we'd do sometimes do 10 takes like that, and suddenly there's like 2 hours of footage just sitting there, and and we only ever used like a minute of it.
Now you guys are obviously tapping into the very rich vein of vampires and the occult and werewolves and zombies that currently permeate pop culture. Why is this? What's going on?
Well, when we had the idea, it hadn't permeated the culture at the time. It was there weren't many movies about vampires out. There were like no werewolf films. I think the last one was something like Wolf with Jack Nicholson, and so this is like 2004 we came up with this idea, and I think there was like Blade and Underworld. They were like the two films that come out. And we just loved the idea because we grew up with the classic vampire films, and like this one's in the 80s as well, and we've always been big fans of those films, but also like personally I love how they never really took themselves that seriously, and then suddenly you've got things like Twilight and these Underworld and all these films which were super earnest in their approach to the plight of the vampire, and I always found that just hilarious. So I was always really keen just to sort of explore, just to kind of counter how cool they were trying to make vampires, and just remind people that it's all pretty stupid.
You've got such extensive experience, mate, in making film and television. You did the Inbetweeners. You did almost the whole season of Inbetweeners.
Yeah.
And it's, so that on top of Eagle versus Shark, Boy, which is a beautiful film,
Cheers.
And Flight of the Conchords as well. I asked this seriously, can you nail the essence of New Zealand humour?
Well, Reese and I have been talking about this the last couple of days, and we think it's the desire to, I call it mining the mundane. And basically just, just willing to explore and then keep delving deeper into like what it is about, what's interesting about the mundane and about the the kind of boring aspects of life and the stuff that people never really concentrate on. A lot of the film is that as well. It's like, what do these creatures of the night do in their downtime, when they're not like, if you, in between the scenes in Underworld and in Twilight and in Blade where they're looking cool and they're pouting and they're sparkling and stuff, what do they do in between those scenes, So that's, and I think a lot of that is, I think that's all we've got to go on at the moment with New Zealand comedy. We can't compete by making like those giant, ridiculous, broad comedies, and like that's just not us. It's just not the way we operate, and I think we all find it quite cringy. Whereas we love the idea, like we know our limitations and we know where we come from, and we know as we just feel like outsiders, and I think
so even in Eagle versus Shark, which builds up to a confrontation, there's an attempt in the story to negate the confrontation. The guy at the other end doesn't want to fight, so there's this pulling back almost from one of the conventions of comedy, which is conflict, which is confrontation. It's almost an anti-approach to comedy, or a non-intuitive approach.
But I think that's such an Antipodean style, is just is to see what everyone else is doing and just intrinsically and instinctively want to go the opposite way, and because I think that we often feel that we have to stand out. Like New Zealand feels that all the time. We feel dwarfed by Australia and kind of in its shadow and in the shadow of like a lot of countries, and as a result I think we're often trying to prove ourselves or trying to stand out a little bit more and trying to do things differently, and just like, we're not going to do what they're doing, so it just so happens that doing the opposite of things means anti-comedy and anti-story.
If this film had been done in Australia, it would have probably been a very loud and garish film, which is kind of the opposite of this film, which is one of its charms.
Well, we're just never like making a big deal out of anything. That's the true Kiwi thing, is like, don't celebrate, don't make a big deal out of anything, don't be loud. Don't draw. Just don't draw too much attention to yourself.
Now, it's always fascinating to see Australian society through the eyes of people from an alien civilization. Can you just tell us how you see Australia?
I think Australia is a deeply weird place, full of very lovely people, but I think in general the country is it's built on a history of denial, of like a lot of things, especially like Indigenous rights and human rights and stuff, and I think that I don't know. I spend a lot of time in the States, and there are so many Australians over there now. It's unbelievable, and it's like they don't deny where they come from, but it's like that. I find colonialism in like colonial countries like Australia and New Zealand. There's a similar thing where there's such a displacement, it feels like, in the people there, where they are kind of from Europe, but they're not. They don't associate themselves and they don't identify with Europe, and they want to be from here, and they'll do anything to be from here, and including just like holding on as tightly as they can, and just like kind of
Do you pick up a sense of unearned arrogance from Australians?
Look, now and then, but also like a lot of my favourite comedies come from here, and like Chris. I'm a huge fan of Chris Lilly, and The Castle is one of my favourite films, and like so it's I think whatever country you go to, you find that arrogance in New Zealand. You find it you find it in so many places, but at the same time you find geniuses, and you find these people who are willing to Do
you have a sense, a sort of a vague contempt that Australians have for New Zealanders, as undeserved as that?
Well, what's weird is I feel like New Zealanders got a big hang-up. I feel like New Zealanders have a bigger hang-up about Australians than Australians have about New Zealanders. I feel like Australians kind of look at us like the younger brother who's sort of I never get the sense that Australians even care about what New Zealand thinks, and I feel like New Zealand's always like, Australians, man. But like, I never feel like, I think it's such an old rivalry that it's, it seems a bit old school now.
In the times I've been to New Zealand, it is astonishing how assimilated the Indigenous population is with mainstream society. That is not the case in Australia. Can you please tell me just your...
That's a very obvious observation when you come here. It's like, I do not see Aboriginals when I walk around these cities, and it's quite odd coming from New Zealand, where there's a huge assimilation into marriage, and Māori are like, we have political parties, and two political parties. We have, TV channels, radio. I mean, it's, and it's, I don't know, without kind of like bumming out the promotion of this film, it's a bummer to see, when you come here, you're like, man, this is like such a beautiful culture, and it's like, the only thing you ever see is like, some billboards at the airport with like, a beautiful, black kid on it, and it's like, oh, this is Australia. But you never see it.